To die before you die is the secret of the mysteries. This cryptic saying has echoed through time, whispered in the initiation chambers of Egypt, sung in the sacred groves of Greece, and preserved in the coded scrolls of the Hermetic adepts. But what does it truly mean, to die before you die? Imagine for a moment that death is not the end. Not a grim reaper waiting to sever your soul from flesh, but a doorway. A threshold. A sacred passage through which the self dissolves, only to be reborn into a truer, deeper essence. Now imagine this: what if the ancients knew how to pass through that doorway, not once, but while still alive? Welcome to the hidden teachings of the mystery schools. For thousands of years, secret brotherhoods and spiritual lineages passed down guarded knowledge about death, not as a morbid fascination, but as a key to inner transformation. In their view, death was not a tragedy to be feared, but a divine initiation. Something not to avoid, but to prepare for. These schools taught that understanding death is the very foundation of understanding life. That only by confronting the illusion of mortality can one awaken to immortality. The initiates were guided through symbolic deaths in dark chambers beneath temples, not to punish, but to reveal. The body may be bound to time, but the soul remembers eternity. In this video, we will unearth the ancient wisdom of the mystery schools and their sacred teachings about death. We'll explore what these esoteric traditions believed lies beyond the veil, and why their initiates underwent rehearsals for death long before their final breath. You'll learn about the rites, the philosophies, and the profound spiritual technologies that were designed to liberate the soul from the prison of fear. Prepare to descend into the ancient catacombs of knowledge. What you find may not only change the way you think about death, it may completely transform how you live. Are you ready to walk between worlds? Long before modern science sought to define consciousness as a byproduct of the brain, the mystery schools of the ancient world proclaimed a far older truth: you are not your body, and death is not your end. From Egypt to Eleusis, from the valleys of India to the mountaintops of Tibet, spiritual traditions across the globe shared a sacred aim: to pierce the veil that separates the seen from the unseen. And among them, the mystery schools stood apart. Not religions, but initiatory systems. Not temples of belief, but laboratories of transformation. They existed not to worship the divine, but to become it. Let us begin in ancient Egypt, whose Book of the Dead is not a funerary manual, but a map of the soul's journey through the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that at death, the heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, truth, harmony, divine law. But this judgment wasn't just a post-mortem trial. It was a living initiation, practiced in advance by the initiates of the priesthoods. Through ritual, dream work, and altered states, they rehearsed their death, over and over, until fear dissolved and clarity emerged. The Greeks inherited this wisdom and refined it in their Eleusinian mysteries. These rites, kept in total secrecy for over 1,000 years, centered around the myth of Demeter and Persephone, symbols of death and rebirth, descent and return. Initiates were sworn to silence, but those who emerged spoke in hushed awe of their encounter with the underworld. Plato himself, a mystery initiate, said, "Those who are initiated possess a knowledge which makes them cherish life and face death with serenity." In the East, the Tibetan Vajrayana path carries a similar vision. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, Bardo Thodol, guides the soul through the intermediate realms after death, but it too is a tool for the living. Monks recite it while still alive, preparing for the moment of ego dissolution. The goal is not merely to survive death, but to awaken through it. Even the early Christian Gnostics, now largely erased by orthodoxy, spoke of death as a liberation from the material prison of the demiurge. To them, the body was the tomb of the soul, and knowledge, or gnosis, was the key to resurrection now, not later. Across continents and cultures, these schools held a common understanding, that death is not a punishment, it is a mirror. And to look into that mirror while alive is to see beyond illusion. To see the world not as it appears, but as it truly is. They believed that initiation into the mysteries was a death in miniature, a sacred rehearsal. One that shattered the false self, and resurrected the true. Through fasting, isolation, sacred symbols, and sometimes even near-death experiences, initiates were stripped of identity, ego, and fear. And what remained was the eternal. In their view, the uninitiated dies in ignorance, clinging to the illusion of self. But the initiate dies enlightened, conscious, awake, and free. This was not morbid fascination. It was the ultimate spiritual science. The ancients were not obsessed with death, they were devoted to what lies beyond it. And their teachings were never about escaping life, but transcending it. In the next section, we will begin to unravel exactly what these initiations involved, how the mystery schools taught death not as an end, but as a beginning. To understand what the mystery schools truly taught about death, we must first let go of what modern culture has told us. Death, in our world today, is often viewed as a tragic full stop, something to avoid, deny, or sanitize. But to the initiates of the mysteries, death was not a single moment at the end of life. It was a spiritual technology, a process that could be experienced before the body perished. Their teachings began with this core principle. You are not the body. You are not the mind. You are the eternal witness, cloaked in form for a time. But the self, they taught, forgets. At birth, we fall into amnesia. We become convinced that we are our names, our histories, our thoughts. And so begins the dream of separation. Death, then, is the great disillusionment, the unraveling of the illusion that we were ever these fleeting forms. To prepare for this unraveling, mystery schools designed powerful rites of passage that mimicked the stages of death itself. These were not symbolic exercises, they were psycho-spiritual operations, carefully crafted to induce ego death, the dissolving of personal identity, and the direct experience of the soul's immortality. Take the ritual of descent, a foundational element of many initiatory paths. The initiate would often be blindfolded, led into dark underground chambers or labyrinthine tombs, spaces deliberately constructed to simulate the inner realms of the underworld. There, in complete sensory isolation, one would undergo fasting, disorientation, and even mock judgment. The body weakened. The mind rebelled. The ego grasped for control. And then, at the breaking point, silence. In that silence, something stirred. It is said that some initiates would enter trance-like states so deep, they hovered at the threshold of clinical death. In that state, they claimed to encounter guides, divine beings, or archetypal forces, what some might call angels, gods, or higher aspects of their own soul. These were not hallucinations, they insisted, but realities more vivid than waking life. And always, at the heart of the teaching, was this. You are not dying. You are waking up. That death, in these rites was the death of illusion, the stripping away of what was never truly you. Your roles, your attachments, your fears, they were the clothes of the soul, now being burned in the fire of transformation. The Egyptians called this process the opening of the mouth, a ceremony in which the soul, once trapped in flesh, was released to speak the truth of its own divinity. In the Eleusinian mysteries, it was the vision granted to the initiate at the climax of the ritual, a blinding light after total darkness, a symbolic resurrection into sacred knowing. To the uninitiated, this was madness. To the initiate, it was liberation. And herein lies the paradox. The more you die before you die, the more fully you live. Because what dies is not life itself, but the false self, the one ruled by fear, by separation, by the illusion of control. These rites weren't merely about preparing for physical death, they were about breaking the soul free while still alive. Once the initiate had passed through the symbolic underworld and emerged anew, they no longer feared death, because they had met it, and walked through it. In Part 2, we will dive deeper into the esoteric mechanics of this process, exploring the specific teachings on the soul's journey after death, the role of the astral body, and how the mystery schools mapped the terrain of the afterlife with astonishing precision. Because in truth, they weren't just preparing people to die. They were teaching them how to be eternal. So what happens after death? To the mystery schools, this was not a question of faith, it was a question of direct experience. They taught that consciousness does not vanish at death, instead, it travels. It journeys. It sheds layers, like a serpent molting its skin, until only the essence remains. This journey was not left to speculation. The initiates were taught to map it. In the Hermetic and Egyptian traditions, death was seen as a passage through 7 gates, or planes of being. Each level corresponded to a different aspect of the self, the physical, the emotional, the mental, the will, the higher mind, the soul, and finally, the divine spark, the Atman, the undying core. These gates were not only external stages, they were internal layers of illusion. At each one, something had to be surrendered, a fear, a desire, a false belief. Only by letting go could the soul ascend. The Tibetan teachings speak of a similar journey through the bardas, transitional states after death where the soul is confronted with projections of its own consciousness. Beautiful visions, terrifying demons, seductive illusions, all are reflections of the mind. If the soul remains lucid, it can navigate these bardas and awaken. But if it clings to fear or craving, it is pulled back into rebirth. This concept, that what you experience after death mirrors the contents of your consciousness at the moment of death, was central to the mystery traditions. And this is why they insisted, prepare now. The schools taught that death magnifies the state you're in. If you're identified with the ego, you'll cling to form. If you've practiced detachment, you'll flow into light. If you've realized the soul as your true nature, death becomes not a rupture, but a reunion. The body dies, yes. The personality dissolves. But the essential self, the soul or spirit, passes through into higher realms. Some called these realms the Elysian fields, others the astral planes, or the celestial spheres. But all agreed, the soul carries with it the vibrational imprint of its earthly life. This imprint determines what realms it can access. In the Hermetic teachings, this was expressed as the law of correspondence, as above, so below. What you cultivate within becomes your reality without. Thus, the soul must be trained, refined, through initiation, meditation, ritual, and self-observation. But there was more. Certain mystery schools taught that the soul is surrounded by subtle bodies, layers of energetic form that extend beyond the flesh. These include the etheric body, the emotional body, the mental body, and the causal body. At death, these bodies are shed one by one, like garments being removed. But if these bodies are heavy with unresolved emotion or karmic debris, the soul may become stuck, lost in liminal zones, confused, or even bound to the earth plane. Thus, initiates were instructed to purify the subtle bodies while alive, through sacred sound, fasting, breathwork, and dream work. In Egypt, they practiced Ka and Ba integration, the uniting of the personality soul and the higher self. In India, yogis learned to exit the body consciously through the Sushumna, the central channel, at the crown of the head. Even death itself was believed to have a specific gateway, the door of the sun, aligned with the pineal gland. A soul trained to rise through this door could escape the cycle of rebirth entirely and merge into the divine source. But this was not automatic. It was earned. It was practiced. Because in the eyes of the mysteries, death was a skill. It could be fumbled, or mastered. And the ones who mastered it were called twice-born. Not merely alive once through the body, but born again through the soul. They became radiant beings, unbound by fate, free from fear. To meet them was to feel something ancient. Something eternal. In the next section, we will explore how you can begin to apply these teachings in your own life, how to begin your own little death and awaken the eternal within. The mystery schools did not exist to fill minds with exotic ideas, they existed to transform lives. And while the rituals of ancient Egypt or the Eleusinian chambers may be inaccessible to us now, the principles behind them are not. The path to mastering death begins here, in life. And you can begin today. So how does one die before dying? The first and most essential practice is inner detachment, not abandonment of life, but freedom from identification. Begin by observing your thoughts, your emotions, your roles. Watch them arise. Watch them pass. Ask yourself, if I am aware of this, then what is the I that watches? This simple meditation, practiced daily, begins to reveal the eternal witness, the self behind the self. In mystery school terms, this is the first veil being lifted. Second, engage in symbolic death practices. You don't need a tomb or secret temple, create one in your daily life. Try this. Sit in complete darkness. Close your eyes and imagine your death, not as something fearful, but as a release. See yourself leaving the body. Visualize it clearly. Where does your awareness go? What remains? Ask, what was never born, and can never die? This meditation, done with reverence, begins to dissolve the fear of death and unveil the presence that lies beyond it. Next, cultivate what the mystery schools call purification of the subtle bodies. This isn't about moral judgment, it's energetic hygiene. Here are a few ways. Fasting clears both body and mind, creating space for the subtle self to emerge. Breath work, especially conscious rhythmic breathing, opens the inner channels and simulates the energetic shifts of death. Lucid dreaming or astral projection trains the soul to navigate non-physical realities, precisely what the ancients believed occurred after death. Even journaling your fears, attachments, and clinging identities can serve as a form of purification. Write them down. Burn the page. Let the false self die a little each day. And most importantly, remember the ancient formula echoed across mystery schools. Know thyself. Because what dies is not the true self, it is the mask. The title. The personality. The moment you begin to unearth what lies beneath all that, you step onto the initiatory path. There will be resistance. Your ego will resist annihilation. It will distract, doubt, and plead. That is its nature. But the mystery schools taught that discipline is the chisel that sculpts the soul. Start small. Begin a daily death meditation. Practice being the witness. Detach from identities that no longer serve. Live, as they said, with your eyes turned inward and your heart turned upward. You do not need to fear death. You need to remember who you were before it. In the final section, we'll bring these teachings together, offering a final reflection, and a sacred invitation to walk the path of the eternal, here and now. To the uninitiated, death is the final darkness. To the initiate, it is the moment the sun rises within. The mystery schools were never obsessed with death, they were obsessed with truth. And in death, they saw the most uncompromising mirror of all. In it, we see what we are, and what we are not. The body fades, the stories unravel, but something vast and radiant, remains. That is what they trained for. Not to escape death, but to meet it awake. We've journeyed together through ancient tombs and sacred texts, through rituals of ego death and the hidden landscapes of the soul. We've seen how initiates faced the great unknown not with terror, but with reverence. Because they knew, what is born must die, but what is real was never born, and cannot die. And now, this ancient invitation is before you. You don't need a temple carved in stone. Your body is the temple. You don't need a high priest. Your awareness is the teacher. You don't need to wait for the end to meet death. You can begin today. Contemplate your impermanence not to despair, but to awaken. Strip away the false to reveal what is true. Die to illusion, so you may be reborn in clarity. Because in the mystery schools, death was never the enemy. It was the threshold to immortality. So ask yourself, not someday, but now. Who am I, if nothing can be taken from me? And when you sit with that question, long enough, deep enough, you may find the silence that all sages speak of. The silence beyond fear. The silence beyond death. And in that silence, you will remember. You have never truly been asleep. And you were never truly alone.